Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Gemma McCarthy, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the CIWEM webinar titled The Implementation of the Climate Action Plan in Ireland, where we'll be looking at case study initiatives. This is delivered as part of CIWEM's Climate Emergency Net Zero Digital Series. Before we start, some general notes. This event will be recorded. It's important to note that we put recordings of our events up on the CIWEM website and on YouTube when the authors and speakers give us permission to do so, and as long as there are no copyright issues. You can view past digital series on our YouTube channel, and the link to which will be put into the chat. If you experience any technical issues and need assistance, please use the chat feature on Zoom to let us know what the problem is and what help will be required. We'll take questions at the end of each of the two presentation sessions. And if you'd like to put a question or make a comment about the talks, please use the Q&A facility on Zoom. The chat should be for technical issues only. When asking your questions also, please state who you're posing the question to. There will be a short comfort break following the first Q&A session. Also to note, there's 1.5 hours CPD is attributable to the webinar. However, we do not provide CPD certificates. For those of you who are not familiar with the organisation, CIWEM represents and supports a community of thousands of members and organisations in 90 countries who are dedicated to improving water and environmental management for the benefit of the public. Its aim is to work towards a safer, more sustainable world, and its mission is to build a global community of water and environmental professionals dedicated to working for the public benefit. This webinar today is the first in a series of 3 having a climate action theme and an initiative of the Republic of Ireland Branch Committee supported by CIWEM HQ in London, both in terms of the webinar organisation and administration. So, why are we here? Well, it's often quoted that we are the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last to be able to do anything about it. We hear that quote very, very often, but more and more frequently, we're seeing the impacts of climate changes across the globe, between wildfires, cracks in the polar ice caps, increased frequency of storms, flood events, etc. We see kids that are worried about their future. I see my own kids worried about what kind of a life they'll have and what quality of life they'll have. That's a heavy responsibility on all of us. And however, I have to admit I'm ever the optimist. And one of the things that I've seen encouraging over the last number of years has been the transformation of climate action from a nice to have, from an aspirational goal or target to a solid and clear objective. We see this increasingly across the globe. Sustainability pillars are increasingly being built into projects and into work that we do from a very early outset. We see them as being included as quality measures in investment decisions, and sustainability practices are no longer the luxury of wealthy organizations, but being built into business as usual and good business sense. My own organization, for example, have continually set ourselves ambitious targets for sustainability practices, and recently pulled our own target for carbon neutrality back by 2 years and proudly achieved it last year in 2020. The Climate Action Plan in Ireland has allowed us to map a course for 2030. And again, on the encouraging note, I was heartened last week to hear Mark Foley from EirGrid at the RAI conference articulate the need to separate the aspirational, still not yet clear targets for those things that we're trying to achieve in 2050 to what we need to do now. Getting to 2030 needs immediate action. It needs action that we are taking now, and build that needs to happen now. Clear pathways are emerging, and the Climate Action Plan has allowed us to define those paths and to define those targets. It's no mean feat. You know, the low-hanging fruit has long been plucked. We're having to work harder and harder for smaller and smaller gains, but all of those gains are coming, and these actions and these action plans that we're seeing, they gain a momentum, and they'll get us to 2030, I'd like to believe. For me, over the next hour and a half, we'll be joined by speakers from a diverse range of organisations here to share how their organisations are working to achieve the objectives set out in the Climate Action Plan. I'm very excited to see how these organisations are faring on the path to achieving the ambition set out in the Climate Action Plan. We'll hear first from Francis Noel Duffy, who is a Green Party TD and spokesperson on housing. Francis is an architect by profession and a former lecturer in the Dublin School of Architecture, TU Dublin. He is now TD, member of the Irish Parliament, the Dáil, for Dublin South West. The Green Party is a partner in the current Irish coalition government. Francis is also a member of the Eastern and Midlands Regional Assembly, which has remit to oversee the regional economic planning guidelines. With that, Francis, I'd like to invite you to unmute your mic, switch on your video, and I'll hand over to you. Francis Noel Duffy.
Thanks, Gemma. I'm just going to share my screen if that's okay. Let's hope I can slideshow. Okay, so yes, thank you, Gemma. I'm because I got elected to the Dáil, I'm not a member of the Regional Assembly, but I'll talk to that in a bit. So I hope I'm just about 9 minutes. Hopefully, it's a bit more than 9 minutes is my time. So I've timed it. I hope to brief you on some of the current government climate actions today, and I will also talk a little about my own journey with embodied carbon in the construction industry. Firstly, the image I'm showing, I feel defines simply what we need to do. One size will not fit all, but balance will be required in our industrial world. So where we cannot eliminate the CO2 emissions footprint, we will need to find ways of creating bigger handprints through our energy systems, biodiversity, and transport infrastructure. As an exercise, I asked my 12-year-old son Tig to draw his version of the original image by the Living Future Institute, a powerful organisation who have inspired me when working with my architectural students. They have a great sustainable building code called the Living Building Challenge, which sets out design challenges for architects to achieve when designing buildings sustainably. For example, buildings producing 105% of their energy needs, sourcing their own water, and dealing with waste on site. Okay, so what is the government doing apart from dealing with a pandemic? Much of what I'm going to discuss is specifically green policy. So climate action and progress since the Greens entered government, the climate bill. The bill has gone through pre-legislative scrutiny in the Climate Action Oireachtas Committee, which has now cross-party support. Further to this, 70 of the 75 amendments were taken on board. The bill will require all departments to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, it will be the responsibility of the ministers of each department to develop, plan, and deliver these cuts. This will be significant in delivering the programme for government commitment to annually reduce greenhouse gas emissions by an average 7% between now and 2030, which is going to be difficult, I have to say. Retrofitting. In my own area, retrofitting is hugely important. However, it is no easy obstacle. My calculations price this national problem in the region of 90 billion euros. Currently, we have 1.5 million homes in Ireland. Around 200,000 of these are in state ownership, and it is the objective of the state to retrofit these to B2 level. Various funding schemes are also being considered to assist the private housing stock, with the biggest potential problem being the private rental sector and how the owners will be incentivized to meet the required standards. Energy transition. I find this area very exciting, and it is a privilege to be elected and sit on the Housing Committee that is overseeing the legislative process of the Marine Planning and Development Bill. This bill provides for the new streamlined development consent process for offshore renewable energy. The bill will help the state transition towards a sustainable, secure, and competitive energy system, and will meet our climate change goals. Currently, we import in the region of 6 billion euros worth of fossil fuel energy per year. This legislation has the potential of seeing this reversed and Ireland becoming an energy exporter in the future, while also providing sustainable regional employment. On a domestic level, but I feel equally important, is the introduction of the Renewable Energy Microgeneration Support Scheme. It is in a consultation process currently. However, when this scheme becomes practice, homes, schools, farms, sports clubs, and community centres alike can begin to produce their own energy through PV solar panels in the main, and sell their excess energy back to the grid. And in doing so, contribute to the production of our electricity, sustainable employment, and sometimes getting paid for it. Transport, walking and cycling. It would not be right for me not to mention cycling and walking infrastructure. I've always loved cycling, so much so I worked as a courier in New York many moons ago. However, with respect to this government, last month, €250 million was allocated by the NTA for sustainable mobility infrastructure, which is welcomed considering we have very poor facilities currently. And And I say that because I found an interesting tweet recently from the Bicycle Network stating, when you build more roads, you get more cars. The same logic applies when you build more separated, connected, accessible bike lanes, you get more people riding bikes. So I'd like to think our continued presence in government will enable more infrastructure to allow a culture of cycling here. So my children will be able to cycle freely as I remember doing so in the 80s. I also have to mention the metro line south of Dublin City and the political work I've actioned while being a member of the Eastern Midlands Regional Assembly. I had motions passed into policy that would see the metro split south of the city to serve the UCD and the Rathfarnham-Knockline corridors. This met resistance from the department and the NTA. However, in 2019, the minister directed the NTA to investigate the proposals which are currently ongoing. Dublin City is crying out for a connected rail network, and I'm just going to put on that slide there. Rail network, sorry, I should put on earlier. That most of our international cities I have lived in are afforded. There are designs for a Metro West, a Dart interconnector, a Lucan Lewis, which along with the proposed metro and some clever extensions could give us an interconnected city, alleviating congestion, commuting angst and pollution. Lastly, on my government update and on a side, one thing COVID-19 has given us is remote working. Something I was researching and arguing for a year ago, now it is accepted. And I find this personally is very family friendly too. So I also wanted to discuss a topic which has become a hobby horse of mine and produces 11% of global CO2 emissions, that is embodied carbon. The background to this reaches back to my academic responsibility to introduce students in the Dublin School of Architecture to the ESM module, which stands for Environmental Design, Building Services and Materials, and which involves analysing past, present and future systems that can allow for sustainable design of architecture. Within this remit, I began researching Irish timber through an MArch, asking the question, why do we not use timber in Ireland akin to other countries considering its sustainable qualities? My journey of investigating timber's sustainable properties brought me to seeing a bigger picture. That is the full spectrum of materials in a construction project, where they come from, how they processed, manufactured, transported, live their life and finally go to their resting place, or better, start a new life by being recycled or upcycled. Upcycle is a new word to me, which I found in an insightful book called Cradle to Cradle, well worth a read. So through the journey of a material's life, it picks up embodied carbon en route to the point where it's 11% of global CO2 emissions. So how do we mitigate these emissions? So ECIs and EPDs are short for environmental cost indicators and environmental product declarations that are applied to materials, and where you apply these measurements to a full building via the life cycle assessment process, you get its total embodied carbon. Typically, Irish buildings carry embodied carbon numbers in the region of 900 kilograms per square metre. This is like a G in the BER rating system. We need to get these down through building regulations, which I've been working on with others. The main experts here are the Irish Green Building Council, who I've been learning from and currently working with on a live project that we hope will meet a low embodied carbon target. For your information, an A-rated building embodied carbon would be in the region of 300 kilograms per square metre. So with all this in mind, and the guidance of the IGBC, the Irish Green Building Council, I hope to table a motion in the Dáil going forward, calling for measures to oblige the state procurement to meet specific embodied carbon targets and eventually roll it out to the private sector. Nearly finished. So if you're interested in this space, the London Energy Transformation Initiative, LETI for short, sets out in detail how to meet 2030 and 2050 targets. It is an excellent manual and available online. I've used it to develop the building I'm working on, which we hope will be a template providing some empirical direction and understanding of how to achieve low embodied carbon buildings in Ireland. In short, the lessons I've incorporated into the building are simple layout, building that harnesses the sun's light and heat. The structure is cross-laminated timber and recycled brick with lime mortar. I hope this gives you some insight to the government's actions and the importance of reducing embodied carbon in our construction sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis, and thanks for that great insight into government policy and embedded carbon in building materials. Apologies for wrongly attributing you to the region and Midlands and Eastern Assembly. So apologies for that.
They kicked me off.
Thank you. Our next speaker comes from Dublin City Council, where she is their Climate Action Coordinator. Dr. Sabrina Decker holds a PhD in Environmental Policy from the School of Architecture and Planning and Environmental Policy at University College Dublin, and received her Master of Public Affairs from Sciences Po in Paris and Masters in Public Policy from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore. She has worked as a research fellow with the Secretariat of the Climate Change Advisory Council, providing expertise in cities, climate adaptation and just transition. She has developed the climate action plans for the 4 Dublin local authorities and is now responsible for the implementation of Dublin City Council's Climate Change Action Plan 2019 to 2024. I, for one, am very keen to hear about Dublin City Council's work on the Climate Action Plan. So I would invite you, Sabrina, to unmute your mic, switch on your video and take it from here. Dr. Sabrina Decker.
Great, thank you, Gemma. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. I can't see anything else, as with Zoom, it's always that way. Gemma's kind of covered my role. So my name is Sabrina Decker. I'm the Climate Action Coordinator for Dublin City Council. What I'll do in this presentation is give you a broad overview of what the climate change plan is, where we're at, and just kind of some of the directions we are and the challenges we are facing going forward. So the Climate Change Action Plan, I would like to really emphasize that this Climate Change Action Plan is focused on the remit of the local authority. So the plan is focused on what DCC does in its operations and service delivery. So it's very internal. It's about us being a leader in climate action and how we actually prepare our operations and service delivery for a climate resilient future. So there's four targets in this: a 33% improvement in the council's energy efficiency by 2020, which we have met and exceeded. I think we are at 36.8%. A 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but as everyone knows, I'd like to highlight that this was, again, for the council's emissions, which only includes our public lighting, our housing, and our leisure centres. But with the climate bill emerging, that will change to an absolute target of 50%. The other two objectives are to make Dublin a climate resilient region. So this is mainly focused on the adaptation piece, and then to actively engage and inform our citizens on climate change, which is very clearly stated in the National Climate Change Plan and our expectations around this. So there's 5 key thematic areas, which you can see here on the slide. So energy, buildings, transport, flood resilience, nature-based solutions, and resource management. These are interlinked. They're not exclusive of each other. So an action in transport does have a connection to nature-based solutions. So we'd like to see greenways, cycleways that are also incorporate flood alleviation measures as well. And the plan is also not just limited to mitigation. It is both adaptation and mitigation. So the two are combined in this. So what are we doing? So under energy and buildings, a lot of the actions that we're taking are retrofits of social housing. We've retrofitted about 70% of our housing in the housing stock, so that's single housing. We are working on retrofitting apartments, so the complexes that we have. We have innovated something called energy performance contracting, so EPC, with our leisure centers, and that's a guarantee that any energy efficiency measures uptake by the contractor, that we achieve those in the buildings. On transport, just to emphasize again, we're focused on the active piece. We're focused on walking and cycling. And a key piece around this is also it's measures to improve air quality. So last year in February 2020, before we all got put into lockdown, we signed on to the WHO Breathe Life campaign. And this is quite an ambitious target because WHO standards for air quality are significantly higher than those for the European Commission. But this was also an important message for us to send to young people that we are working on this. Like, I moved to Dublin in 2012, but I've heard stories of the smogs in the 80s, but our air quality is valuable to us and it's a huge resource. So we need to protect that and maintain it. In flood resilience, we always prioritize soft measures first. So this is about behavior change, encouraging people to keep in mind what they're doing, like green infrastructure, we emphasize that. So as you can see in this photo, greening includes putting sustainable urban drainage in the city, and also using tree planting or using nature to respond. Gray infrastructure measures also in this photo is a last resort for us. So it's typically where an area where a green solution is not possible. So along the Campshires, it is challenging to put a green infrastructure measure there. We also have early warning systems. So we have a Triton measure to inform us, Triton and Tide Watch, to let us know when a flood event may occur. In terms of nature-based solutions, we have the plan links to other plans in the city. So we have the biodiversity plan, the tree plan, the park strategy, and the public realm plan. We also have green infrastructure and greening strategy plans that are emerging. So Stony Batter, the Northeast Intercity, and the Liberties. We are also trying to explore the possibility of green retrofits or greening social housing. We also have an upcoming sustainable urban drainage strategy that we're working on to inform developers. Another thing that our councillors really enjoy is that we aren't using glyphosate anymore in terms of weeding the city. So we are manual weeding. So there was a lot around that in the summer and the fall. And I think the other theme that we have is resource management. To me, this is an important one. And there's a little bit of a story to the name of this. We didn't want to call it just waste because climate action is about our resources and how we use resources. So this isn't just about segregated waste in the public realm, but it's getting people to be a bit more aware of what they're consuming and how much they're using. So it's also related to water. So for example, in the council buildings, we are putting measures in to reduce our water use. So we've had low flush toilets. So it's things like that, but it's also energy related too. So putting sensors in, lighted LEDs into our buildings. So getting us to think about our resources. And we also have a bit of a public outfacing element to this. So through this action, we have a lot of civic engagement through the local area prevention network, through our Tidy Towns networks, through our city neighborhood networks. And for businesses and SMEs, we have the Modus Circular Economy program, which was launched in 2020 as well. And again, was a bit of a victim to COVID, but our team there in the local enterprise office kind of challenged through, and they've done the training online. So it is a great program. So if you're interested in it, please do look at our Leo website and sign up. I hear that a lot of spaces it's selling it kind of fast. So how are we doing? So under the legislation, we are required to report annually to the department. So our first annual report was submitted in 2020 October. We have 83% of our actions ongoing, 6% are completed, 10 we haven't really started due to COVID, but COVID has helped us a bit too in terms of everybody has seen the rollout of cycling infrastructure and a little bit more of the pedestrian spaces. It also has highlighted some of our challenges. So what are our challenges kind of going forward? We do need a just transition, and this is always going to be a challenge. I think nationally we've focused on the just transition in terms of peat workers, but it is about society as a whole. And we do need this transition to be equitable and inclusive. And I think a big opportunity coming up is a development plan. So land use for the city is critical to 2030 and reaching that target, but it is about it's about bringing transport together, housing together, employment opportunities together. And if we view that from a just transition perspective, we start to understand why creating full, complete villages and neighborhoods and using that opportunity to make sure that people have access to reliable transport, feel safe cycling, that they can access work by making those choices easy and that work is close and that house is affordable, that we think about a just transition that's there. It's also about enabling people to have ownership of the solutions. We do get the sense that climate change does feel very big, very challenging, but it is, like I mentioned earlier with resource management, it is about the simple things. It is about being a little more conscious of your water use, being more conscious of your energy use. And that's kind of coming forward. That's our focus in the next few years, is also doing that piece around community engagement. So for us also, we would really like people to contribute to the development plan, which is in that phase right now. And there will be a climate change chapter in there. So just to kind of come to the end here, I think another thing for us is Dublin will be here in 2100. We will not. And a big thing for us as we're going around climate action is we are caretakers of the city, and we have a responsibility to future generations to ensure that the next generation has a high quality of life, that they can enjoy the many benefits that the city has. Like I always think, being not from Dublin, like it's great that you have access to the sea and you have access to these beautiful parks that are all within walking distance if you choose to make it a walking adventure for yourself. And I'll kind of leave on two last things as a thought for everybody is a lot of the times I'm thinking about what is our collective legacy, because whilst we as a council do a lot and have to do a lot in terms of climate action, we do have to work together to do this, to achieve this. So we need to think about that. And one thing I think we're challenging ourselves with is we are now an applicant city for European Green Capital 2023. This is a great opportunity for us. Receiving this award is also a challenge for us to kind of work together to be that city that has great air quality, that has a good mix of positive noise and good noises, and it's a quieter city. It's also a city that's considering what it's using. It's a city that considers its water use. It's a city that's responding to climate change. It's also a city that's innovative and that is working towards green growth. So that is where we are as a council, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Sabrina. That's fabulous. It's great strides being made in Dublin City, and certainly from my perspective and where I sit in Dublin, it's nice to know that the clean air in particular was the one thing that really struck me, and the engagement in keeping the citizens involved in where we go from here. So thank you. Our next speaker. Before we do, just a reminder to everyone in the audience, please use the Q&A to raise any questions or to pose any questions to any of our panelists and any of our speakers. Also, when you are posing the question, please let us know who you are posing it to. Our final speaker for this session comes from Bord na Móna, Dr. John Riley, who is their head of renewable energy. John is a member of the board, a member of Bord na Móna's senior leadership team with specific responsibility for the operation and development of their expanding generation portfolio in the Irish market. His team is currently leading a 1.6 billion investment programme, which will see them add at least 1 gigawatt of new renewable assets to its fleet by 2030. John has over 20 years experience in the energy sector, having been part of the senior management team at Eden Dairy Power. He's also worked for a number of major international utility players in the sectors such as the German utility E.ON and Fortum, a Finnish utility company. John, who is currently on the board of the Electricity Association of Ireland, also sits on a number of policy committees across the energy sector and holds a PhD in chemistry from UCD. So John, I'll invite you to unmute your mic, switch on your video and take it from here. Dr. John Riley.
Thanks very much, Gemma, and can I say thanks a million to CIWEM as well for inviting me to participate today, and I'm delighted to do that. So given the short time here, I'll crack straight on. I suppose that most people, and I hope you're not seeing all that's popping up on my screen here, I suppose that most people in the audience would probably know who Bord na Móna are. We're a company that's almost 90 years old, and for much of that 90 years, we've been doing what you see here in the picture, which is harvesting milled peat. And over the years, that milled peat has been primarily for use in the energy sector. It's an indigenous form of fuel, so it's helped massively in security of supply in the energy sector over the decades. And the principal use of that milled peat fuel is in the peat-fired power stations across the Midlands. Bord na Móna, as part of its transition programme 15 years ago, acquired the Eden Dairy Power Station from E.ON at the time. And at that time, that station was fired 100% with milled peat. Today, the station is still in operation, but 70% of the fuel that we're using in the station is sustainable biomass. And we will completely remove peat from the fuel mix in the station by the end of 2023. We would also have supplied fuel to the ESB stations across the Midlands, the West Offaly and the Loughree power stations. Both of those stations closed at the end of 2020. And then another thing that we did with the milled peat was we would have processed it. We would have manufactured various fuels from that for the home heating sector, the most famous of which is the iconic peat briquette. And I can tell you this morning that the iconic peat briquette, as you'll see in a moment, will be gone from our shelves and from your stockyards by 2024. We were also involved as part of that business in importing coal and bagging coal and selling it under the Bord na Móna brand. But we got out of that business as part of the transition program, the decarbonisation program that's underway. We exited that business about 4 years ago, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So when Bord na Móna set about looking at what its carbon footprint was 10, 15 years ago so that we could begin to take action to reduce it, we found, you know, obviously we are a big logistics company, really. We're pushing and pulling product and raw materials are up and down and around the countryside. And what we discovered when we measured it first, we really didn't have a carbon footprint at all. We actually had a carbon jackboot. So for us to get from where we were 10 or 15 years ago to where we are today was going to require a hell of a lot of heavy lifting and a massive, massive transition. And at the very core of that was the fact that our core business relied on harvesting a fossil fuel or mining a fossil fuel or whatever you want to call it. And this is a chart that shows you the level of milled peat production that we've undertaken over the years. And the heyday of peat production, milled peat production, was in the 70s, 80s and 90s, when peat formed a very, very important part of the Irish energy mix and a very important part of the electricity sector's energy mix. And at that point in time, given the I suppose the labor intensive nature of what we did, in spite of increased mechanization, the company had over 5,000 employees. In fact, at its peak, Boardnamona employed nearly 10,000 people. A lot of those would have been seasonal workers during the peak production season. But as part of our transition program, we have over the last couple of years been moving out of this core activity, and 2020 marked a seminal year. It's not that there's the bars missing off the graph there. The amount of peat production that we carried out last year was minuscule. It's so small it doesn't appear on the graph. And of course, you probably will be aware that we made a major announcement in January that peat production, milled peat production, is over in Boardnamona. And in terms of what we do, the most important action from our perspective, the most important contribution to the climate action plan is for us to take peat out of the Irish energy mix. And that is a journey that we have been on for quite a period of time. Another key metric for us was we didn't just want to stop that core business, put the locks on the gate and close down. We wanted to transition the company from a fossil fuel company through to a green climate solutions company. And that all sounds lovely, but it is something that we are actively doing. So a key metric for us is looking at how we transform ourselves away from our brown activities on our balance sheet to the green activities. And in 2006, under the metrics that we're using today, 90% of our income came from what we would call brown activities or fossil fuel activities. Last year, 2020, we were approaching a very, very seminal moment in our transition, in that our last published statutory accounts clearly show that almost 50% of our activities are now non-peat based, non-fossil fuel based, and are focused on sustainable activities to help Ireland achieve its climate and energy targets in the 21st century. By 2025, according to our 10-year plan, we will have flipped things on its head, in that almost 90% of, or almost 80 or over 80% of our income will derive from these green activities. And in terms of those sustainable and green activities, the big driver, I would like to think anyway, is the business unit that I have the privilege to head in Boardnamona, and that's our renewable energy division. Boardnamona's land bank is one of our key strategic assets, and it's one of the state's key strategic assets, because we've proved over the last decade or so that it is infinitely suitable for the development of renewable energy projects at significant scale. And what you see here in this photograph is a picture of our Onini wind farm in Mayo. It sits out almost in the Atlantic Ocean. We don't have to go offshore to get offshore wind speeds in Mayo. We get offshore wind speeds onshore in this area of Mayo. So it sits in a very windy area. It's a vast site. The site itself was a former peat production bog. It would have provided peat over the years and significant employment, it has to be said, in the North Mayo region. And the power station at Onini and Bellacorrick closed back in the early noughties. And we moved on to look to develop the site to more sustainable activities. And I think what's really wonderful about our transition is that we now see a future where this land bank that had played a very, very important role in the security of energy supply for the state will continue to do that going forward, but to do it in a more sustainable way, a way that contributes majorly to the significant problem of climate change. Because beyond what we're doing today, this is a 100 megawatt phase 1 development. Phase 2 is under construction over here on the right hand side, or on the left hand side, and phase 3 is under development on the right hand side. And if you can see the small turbines here, Boardnamona was the first company to develop commercial onshore wind in Ireland back in 1992. That wind farm is still operating. It'll hit its 30th birthday next year. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to move that wind farm from producing electricity from the grid into our first foray into the production of green hydrogen. which could ultimately be a very, very significant solution to some of the energy sector's challenges as we move towards net zero. So moving Bord na Móna from producing peat on these sites ultimately through to producing green hydrogen is what we're trying to do as part of our transition as a company, and to make that significant contribution to Ireland's climate and energy targets. In the context of the sort of impact that that's having on the numbers, the key metrics. Back in 2015, the electricity sector had significantly decarbonized, by the way, from its peak back in the early noughties, when the sector would have produced 17 million tons of emissions on the state's balance sheet. By 2015, it was down to 12 million tons as renewables really began to make their mark. The peat element was still working away at 340 megawatts of peat capacity. And the peat stations themselves were responsible for 3 million tons, so 25% of that 15 million, or that 12 million ton figure in the electricity sector. So again, our biggest contribution to the climate action plan right now is to take peat out of the energy mix. But we don't want to do what we did with our coal business. When we closed our coal business, we closed it for commercial reasons, but also as part of our sustainability agenda. And let's be very clear about that. But it didn't do anything for sectoral emissions, because when we closed it, somebody else moved into the space with the fossil fuel. So closing down things very, very quickly when you don't have alternatives will get us nowhere. We can't switch off all these fossil fuel power stations overnight, or the lights would go out. And that, by the way, would be the end of the climate and energy transition. People wouldn't take that. So we have to do it very, very carefully. So our plan is to replace the 350 odd megawatts of peat-fired capacity that will close with onshore wind in particular. And that's part of the central part of our renewable energy investment program. But also to keep biomass in the mix, because the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time. But as we move forward with our investment program, which is centered around large onshore wind, utility scale solar, and supporting technologies such as battery energy storage, we will make a contribution to ultimately seeing CO2 emissions in the electricity sector fall to zero. In our view, that should happen by 2035. And Bord na Móna, in taking peat out of the energy mix in the first place, and making sure that we make a contribution to replace it with renewable energy, that's part of the journey that we're on and part of the transition and the commitment that we've made under the Climate Action Plan. So as I said, what we really want to do is we want to move from this activity through the processing and the maintenance of peat in the energy mix, through to replacing peat with biomass in our thermal power plants, replacing gas with biogas and bioenergy, which we're also doing, continuing to develop out our very significant wind development program, both onshore and offshore. Bord na Móna is making its first foray into offshore in the next few years, which is a really exciting place to be. And ultimately to use some of that green electricity that we will produce to produce green hydrogen as a combustible zero carbon fuel that will help keep the lights on and keep heat in our homes and keep our transport moving in a more sustainable way. But the final piece that I want to say is, in doing that and undertaking that transition, we need to remember this motley crew. This is a picture that was taken at an awards ceremony in Bord na Móna in 2015. There are 24 or 25 people in this photograph. 75% of those people, as part of the transition, the transformation of our company, are now no longer working with Bord na Móna. And that is something that we have to manage. I think Sabrina mentioned the just transition and the peat workers. It's not just about peat workers, guys. It went from the top table down to the kitchen staff in our canteen facilities across the business. We have taken over 1,000 people out of the company as part of our energy transition, as part of our commitment to changing to a more sustainable future. Now, how we do that and how we manage that and how society does that and how society manages that will be key to the success of this climate action plan, in my view. It is not fair to say that you can take people who worked driving tractors and driving trains and you can get them to retrofit houses, which is something I've heard spoken about. It's not like that. The people that, when you transition to those things, the skills don't automatically transition. And we need to be very careful about speaking that speak when really behind it, telling a guy that he's losing his job to save the planet we have to do it in a different way. I think we've done it reasonably well in Bordemona. We've certainly learned a lot. It's been very painful. It's been very, very difficult. But those of us that are there now, we're very focused and remain in the company on doing three big things in our contribution to the Climate Action Plan. Removing peat from that energy mix, but also making sure, unlike when we took coal out of our business, that we don't let other fossils flow in there. We want to replace it with fossil alternatives. And that's a big, big focus for us. And ultimately, we want to try to do that in a way that provides sustainable energy solutions and employment. So ensuring that the transition really is just for people and for society, and that that's not just a buzzword that's spoken about in hollowed chambers. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, John. That's, I have to admit, a really inspirational story. Particularly, what strikes me immediately is the name of the company, Bordemona, and your objective being take peat out of the fuel mix. It's a hell of an objective to set yourselves, and it's an inspirational story. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma.
So I'd like to invite now Sabrina and Francis to unmute your mics and switch your videos back on. For John, we have a question here for you. I think that there's great work going on with wind energy. As Francis mentioned earlier, we also need to look at the embodied energy of the wind industry.
Yeah, the embodied energy, when you calculate the amount of carbon that goes into the manufacturing of the construction of wind farms, the payback is less than a year. You know, there's no doubt you can't build wind farms without concrete. You can't build wind farms without a bit of steel. You know, again, the alternatives aren't there. But in real terms, the analysis that we have done, the construction and delivery of a wind farm, the total carbon balance that goes into that from the manufacturing process is netted off after the first year of operation of the wind farm in terms of replacing fossils, displacing fossil fuel generated electricity from the electric power system. You can't have everything, guys. You know what I mean? And this is part of the story. You know, this is part of the problem. Mm-hmm. We're giving an awful lot, and yet people want more.
Yeah.
Easy thing to do is stay in bed.
Pardon?
To stay in bed. You don't produce any emissions if you stay in bed. But that's not going to be the solution. The public won't buy that, you know, and this is where we've got to be really careful.
That and one of the things we talked about earlier, the some sectors will find it more difficult to reach or to achieve the targets, and so consequently there may be pressure on other sectors to overshoot in order to make that up. How do you feel about that? Is that
Yeah, I think the electricity sector has done most of the heavy lifting, as I've shown. The peak of emissions in the electricity sector was 17 million tons back in, I think it was 2001. This year will be down to less than 9 million tons, and I believe that Ireland could, if it really wanted to, have a net zero electric power system before any other system in the world. We could achieve it by 2035. Unfortunately, to achieve it, we have to build infrastructure. People don't like infrastructure. So that's a problem. You can't connect all this offshore wind. You can't connect onshore wind. You can't connect solar. You can't connect whatever you think is carbon neutral. You can't supply electricity to homes without infrastructure, and we're struggling. This idea that we're going to have 5 gigawatts of offshore wind connected to the Irish power system by 2030, Hans Christian Andersen comes to mind. Hans Christian Andersen. 2035 maybe, or 2040 at the pace we're going.
So it needs to inject more pace, you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's about society buying into it. You would not believe the challenge and trouble that we have to, like, somebody said to me recently, if Bordemona was a child, it'd be a delinquent, because we've got battered for not getting out of peat quickly enough. We're now getting battered by people for getting out of peat and putting all those people out of work. We get battered for building wind farms. So as I said, sometimes you think it's just easier to stay in bed. But good news is we won't do that. So bringing the public along with us, guys, is an enormous challenge on this journey. Absolutely enormous. And if we get it wrong, by the way, they won't buy it. They will not buy it.
Yeah.
You know, so I think the electricity sector will do all it can, Gemma. It should be carbon neutral long before any other sector, and then it can't do any more, you know. But what we will be able to do, of course, is to push green electricity into other sectors to help decarbonize them. But things like transport, I think Francis referred to the domestic situation. I'm 30 years in the energy business, how you decarbonize my home here, and I want to. Very, very difficult. Very difficult.
And Francis, what do you see the challenges to achieving the what's set out in the climate action plan? And John, would you mind? I think you unsharing the slides. Thank you very much. Sorry, Francis.
Yeah.
I think, as I said earlier on, it is agriculture and aviation, and how we meet. Diversify, I think, is in the ag sector, and as John is saying, it is bringing people with you. Like the last general election was won on housing and health. It wasn't one on the environment. Like 7% of the people in this country, felt environment was an issue that they'd vote for. So that is a problem of bringing people with you through the system. But I think transport's a big problem. Like, from, I suppose, number crunching I've done, it's really expensive capital investment into rail, if that's where we need. That's where I think we should be going, because you can get out of your car onto a train and move around a city or intercity, but it's expensive, and we don't have, like, we've a small population on a big island, and we don't have a huge amount of money to invest in ourselves, so it's going to take time. I think the transport thing is 30 years. The ag's going to probably be close to that as well. And as John has said, I know from Paul Kenny would be our expert, talks about, energy can be done very quickly. Like we have, and it has been, as John is saying, like the industry has been working towards this position. But I suppose, it is the construction industry is a big player, and we don't get that. Now, one funny thing, a guy I worked with, an architect, Dominic Stevens, used to say passive house, and passive house is defined by the amount of energy that goes into it. And he said all houses in the 80s were passive because we didn't have any money to pay for any energy, so we just put on jumpers. And I'm not saying we should do that, but there's a massive problem in retrofitting. The state can't afford, from what I've been told, to pay out 90 billion euros, to retrofit every house in the country. So it's going to be done by people buying into it. The issue is, I suppose, the rental market, but hopefully with cost rental moving in, if there's more of that coming down the line, the state then is buying into that rental market. But there's a lot of lifting, as a lot of those boots John was talking about. We need lots of boots and lots of shovels, and it's not going to be easy. But I'm not sure if we've any choice. I think all the laws that I've been reading up and studying are very much pointing us in a direction that some of us might be dragged, or will get fined. But I think energy is quick. Transport's going to be slow, so is ag, and the construction sector is turning as well. So I suppose operational energy, we are at passive house or NZEB at the minute, pretty much in Ireland. It's that embodied carbon is the problem, and not a lot of people. I've only learned about it in the last number of years, but a lot of people don't really get it. I didn't really get it originally, but so there's a process there.
You mentioned there about bringing people with you and engaging it's something, Sabrina, you mentioned, struck me there about actively engaging with citizens to ensure their active engagement, and it comes back to what Francis is saying. How do you find from Dublin City's perspective, how are you engaging with Dublin citizens?
COVID's not helping, for one. Everything is online. It's frustrating. Yeah. And so I have just started in this role in June, so it's 9 months, and it's in a role where you're expected to engage constantly, because I think the engagement challenge for us as a local authority, and it links to John's work and to Francis's work as well, is trust in institutions, trust that something will get done, and also underpinning trust is a bit of respect for each other, that there's trust and respect and ownership. Those three kind of issues come together for us. And how do we do this? And kind of just to give an illusion, we are working on we're kind of coming at it from a different angle with some stuff. We've had the opportunity, Creative Ireland has given us a small bit of a challenge to do a creative project around climate change that we'll be launching in a few weeks. That kind of hopefully touches, just listening to Francis there and to John talk about just transitions, and a bit of the work I was doing in the Climate Change Advisory Council was looking at that. What does a just transition in the agriculture sector mean? So this is kind of where this project came from, and it's looking at food and climate change in the urban context a little bit more, but we're trying to be a little bit more creative about it. So we've got a bit of a creative team behind it. And it's just that conversation about, you know, we depend on agriculture for our survival. And agriculture depends on water and soil. So how do we as urban residents actually have that recognition? I think for my PhD research, I always think of Bill Rees's work on ecological footprinting, and cities are not alone. Like, they are dependent on everything outside. We're dependent on for food, water, everything, good air. But I think there's, yeah, there is that challenge. It's like, how do we respect it? So we're kind of looking at, like, what can we do around food waste to prevent it? So we have that project is starting in March, and we want to have a conversation, especially with young people as well, and bring them back to think about what was grown. Like, I think in my own working on that, it's interesting to realize the horticultural history around Dublin. So we just want to highlight on that and play to that, and just to start that simple conversation. So keep your eyes open for it. I'm not going to reveal too much. I'm nervous enough already about this project.
We look forward to it. I'm afraid we're running out of time at this stage. There is one other question, John, if you have a very quick answer for it. I'm not sure if you can see it in the chat at this stage or in the Q&A. As you said, non-renewable energy houses, a lot of employees. What steps are actually taken to transition the role of skilled workers? Like you mentioned, it's not fair to tell a middle-aged person to say that there's no job.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if there's a quick answer.
Yeah,
to
no,
that.
no. And look, very quickly, Gemma, very quickly, what we did in Bordemona was we looked to see how, as part of our transition to a greener climate solutions company, how many people could we transition into my business, for example, and we did. But you have to be very careful about the skill set piece. We had a lot of calls from outside saying, stop those guys harvesting peat and put them into retrofitting houses. Retrofitting houses is about putting in new boilers, putting in control systems. It's not just about lagging attics. It's not just about putting in new windows. You can't, it's about the training. So what we have done is we've tried to all we can do as an organization, we can try to point people in the direction of training, provide them with elements of kickoff. But that sort of level of training and transitioning requires someone have to go back to college for a year or two, perhaps, to get moved from driving a train, for example, to inputting control systems on boilers in houses. So it's not easy to do it all. But the one final thing I will say, guys, this is doable. But the secret to it is pricing. The reason the electricity sector has been so successful is carbon pricing. And the big problem here is the energy transition is going to cost. And the reason we're in the hole we're in is energy is too cheap. Francis, you talked about how in the 80s, yeah, people couldn't afford electricity. It was very expensive. We were burning oil from the Middle East. Problem is today, guys, energy is way too cheap. Way too cheap. So we waste it, we misuse it. You know, houses around the countryside lit up like Christmas trees because electricity as a commodity is too cheap. Energy is too cheap. The secret is put the carbon price on it, because that's the damage it's doing to the economy, and that will change things. That will change things.
Great passion there, John. Absolutely.
Yeah. Can I just say one quick thing, and it's
Sure.
in relation to COVID and bringing people with us. I think one thing COVID has given us is remote working, and in Sabrina's space, all the bicycle lanes that have opened up in Dublin, and it's allowed. I've taken my children out cycling on the road, which I wouldn't have dared doing, 2 years ago. That's kind of closed in a little bit, but I think that's open people's minds maybe a little bit to cycling and the value of it and remote working. So I think I'm hoping, COVID's shed a bit of light on people showing a good way of going forward.
Thank you for that. And I'd love to hear more of that. And I would agree with you wholeheartedly. I can see my own kids out cycling more than they probably would have dared in recent months. Anyway, we have run out of time. I'd like to thank all three of you with very interesting presentations and very interesting conversation afterwards. And also thank the audience for their questions. I can see a few more coming through, but unfortunately we've run out of time at this stage. We'll take a short comfort break now. We'll reconvene in about, let's say in about 4 minutes, and we'll get back together at 11 o'clock. Talk to you then. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone, to part 2 of this CIWEM webinar, where we look at the implementation of climate action plans in Ireland. Our next speaker, Charlie Coakley, hails from Irish Water, where he is their sustainable policy lead. Charlie is an environmental scientist with over 20 years experience in a number of areas, including energy efficiency, water management and biodiversity. Charlie leads Irish Water's dedicated sustainability policy team, developing and integrating sustainable policy and strategies. These policies and strategies are aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. So Charlie, I'll invite you to unmute your mic, switch on your video and take it from here. Charlie Coakley from Irish Water, everyone.
Good morning. Thank you. Can you hear me, Gemma? Can you see my screen?
See you perfect. Yes, see
Great.
the screen and hear you.
Great, thanks very much. Good morning, and thanks for the introduction, Gemma. My name is Charlie Coakley, as Gemma said. I lead up the sustainability policy team in Irish Water. And our climate action approach really is a complementary approach, both of mitigation and adaptation to the effects of climate change. And my climate action focus today on a presentation today is really on the mitigation side, is on our energy strategy, EED, energy efficient design, the circular economy, and some of our challenges, but also the opportunities on our decarbonisation journey to date. Sustainability and sustainable development, they underpin our commitment to protect and enhance the environment. And they're key considerations of both our water resources and our wastewater planning. And we have a dedicated team within Irish Water, and our role or remit is developing and integrating really sustainability as BAU, or business as usual. And we're developing policies and strategies that are aligned with Project Ireland 2040, the Climate Action Plan, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the goals have set an ambitious framework. And Water Services has an individual goal within that framework, SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. And we deliver water services to approximately 83% of the Irish population. You can see here on the map on your left-hand side is the range and distribution of our water treatment plants, and on the right-hand side are the wastewater treatment plants. And we operate and maintain nearly 1,900 water and wastewater assets and over 5,000 other assets, and that's including pumping stations and reservoirs. And we produce 1.7 billion litres of water per day through approximately 63,000 kilometres of water main, resulting in over 26,000 tonnes dry solids of sludge per annum. And we treat 1.2 billion litres of wastewater per day through circa 25,000 kilometres of network, and that's producing 58,000 tonnes dry solids of sludge per annum. Now, all that pumping and treatment requires an awful lot of energy, and we have over 8,000 electricity meters and consume over 1,000 gigawatt hours of primary energy per annum. And that's accounting for 21% of the public sector usage and resulting in over 200,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum. And we are the largest consumer of energy in the public electrical energy in the public sector, say accounting for 21%. And electric energy accounts for approximately 90% of our energy consumption, with thermal energy 7% and transport 3%. And we use the equivalent of energy to power over 200,000 homes for a full year, with an annual cost of approximately 85 million. You can see on the two charts there on the right-hand side, typical energy balances at our water treatment plants and also our wastewater treatment plants. And you can see there that the majority of energy is being used in pumping, but also and in aeration. Back in 2016, we developed a sustainable energy strategy. And since then, we have made significant progress on the journey to become an energy efficient, a low carbon, and a sustainable water utility. And our strategy and energy management program takes a business-wide approach with 36 energy action plans, and in 2020 that had 255 discrete energy projects, including EED, retrofits, renewables, lighting and heating, transport, and process optimization. And in 2018, we developed a strategic partnership agreement with the SEAI, and that's for embedding EED, or energy efficient design, as BAU within our business. And currently, we're running at over a 32% energy efficiency improvement, putting us in a strong position to meet our new target of 50% by 2030. And our projects have saved over 90,000 tonnes of carbon, and that's delinking our energy use from our carbon emissions. And one of our biggest challenges in our business is upgrading an aging infrastructure after years of underinvestment, combined with an increase in population and higher quality standards. This is all given us a rising base energy demand. So how are we counteracting this? We're taking a proactive approach to energy efficiency right across our water and wastewater assets. And our sustainable energy strategy covers all aspects of our business, allowing for a business-wide approach to energy efficiency, to embed an energy efficiency culture. And you can see on the screen that we've 10 strategic objectives and 7 strands with 36 energy action plans. And as I said, 255 discrete energy projects fell out of those energy action plans in 2020. And all of these, all of the energy action plans, they all have defined roles and responsibilities. So you have a sponsor, a lead, and also an owner. And our business-wide sustainable approach goes right from concept design right across to our customer. And really, I suppose our strategy drives the direction, with the energy action plans really being the energy, being the engine of the strategy. And our strategic approach embeds sustainable energy management, facilitating us to develop, improve, and maintain and sustain a culture of energy efficiency. And it allows for a top-down, but also a bottom-up approach, and helps lock in savings and efficiencies. Sustainable energy management has enabled us to achieve significant improvements on a national scale. As discussed, one of our biggest challenges is upgrading an aging infrastructure after years of underinvestment. And our strategy is to ensure that energy efficiency and management is considered and factored in right in at the design stage. The opportunities really to achieve significant efficiencies arise at the early design stage, as illustrated there on your screen. And as the design progresses to build phase, the opportunity to achieve resource efficiency decreases due to elements becoming embedded into the design. Over 80% of your costs can become locked in after the design stage. And it's obviously more expensive to having to go back and retrofit. The EE standard has been developed for adoption on all our projects and programs with 4 key elements: use less energy, use energy more efficiently, use it when it costs less, and use it from renewable resources. That helps us achieve a 50% reduction in carbon and 50% efficiency by 2030, whilst also aiming for carbon neutrality. The energy efficient design process requires us to design, build, and operate assets in a way that ensure energy efficiency is integrated right throughout the project and reduce the total life cycle costs and emissions of carbon dioxide. Moving on, our strategy for our sludges is really to rethink how we look at them, not just as a waste that needs to be dealt with. We really view our sludges as a valuable resource, particularly in the context of the circular economy model and climate action. The circular economy model, that's in complete contrast to the linear model, which was take, make, consume, and dispose, with landfill being your primary endpoint. And we're progressing a number of sustainable options, which focuses on the productive reuse and recycling of sludges as a product. The sludge really providing an alternative or a complement to the current raw materials being used, thus enabling a circular economy model. Energy recovery from our wastewater sludge through biogas and from the anaerobic digestion process is used to generate heat and produce a renewable electricity. In terms of our water treatment plant sludges, we're diverting from landfill for use in cement manufacturing, displacing imported bauxite and other raw materials. It's an alternative or complement to current raw materials and helping to reduce the embodied carbon of cement manufacturing. And we're also trialing it in brick manufacturing and using it for nutrient reduction on our treatment systems, again, displacing bought-in chemicals. And all these initiatives really, what they're doing is they're turning what was traditionally a waste into productive reuse with associated climate action benefits. We have developed a biodiversity action plan to help us conserve, enhance, and work with the natural environment. And our approach protects and enhances biodiversity while also providing additional benefits such as carbon sequestration and also drinking water source protection. And we're developing nature-based solutions where applicable across our asset base. Again, challenging that traditional approach of purely concrete and steel as favoured by many engineers, and really installing innovative, sustainable, low carbon sludge rebeds and ICWs to treat wastewater, but also giving biodiversity and habitat benefits. In terms of solar PV, we recently constructed 2 projects at wastewater treatment plants in Neenah and Newcastle West in collaboration with the local authority partners in Tipperary and Limerick. And these renewable energy pilots are providing clean and sustainable electricity to the plants there, while also reducing electricity and the carbon emissions associated with water services. These pilot programs are informing a larger program and pipeline of solar PV within our asset base, and we are developing plans to move towards carbon neutrality through these pilots, but also development of other renewables across our asset base. That's really a whistle-stop tour of some of the challenges we're facing in Irish water, but also the climate action opportunities. And in summary, in addressing those challenges, energy management success really requires that effort right from the top right down to the bottom, to ensure that right through to the key decision makers and operations and staff on the ground. EED is a key component of our energy strategy, because the assets that we put on the ground now will be still operational when hopefully Europe as a continent will be carbon neutral. And decarbonisation, rethinking and looking how can we do things differently. Our approach is obviously energy efficiency first, and energy management, then design of new assets with best-in-class technology, and a clear plan on decarbonising the energy sources through the use of renewables, low carbon solutions, and energy procurement strategies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie. That's a great insight into Irish Water's approach at this stage. The thing that struck me most, embedding sustainability almost as a challenge in at the early stages, at the concept stage, is to try and maximise what you can get from the in terms of savings. Also, nature-based solutions in the circular economy, looking where what traditionally was waste can be actually used as either raw materials or as an energy source. It's a great way forward, a great inspiration to how we can do things.
Yeah, it's really rethinking how you look at things, Gemma. You know, when you're posed a challenge, and well, okay, is it really a challenge? Where is the opportunity within that challenge, and how can we look at that things differently? Yeah,
absolutely. It's coming along a long way at this stage. Okay, on this, thank you, Charlie. The next speaker in this session is from the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, Dr. Lucy Corcoran. Lucy works in SEAI's Research and Technology Department, leading a range of energy research and innovation activities in support of Ireland's low carbon energy transition. She's an engineer with 12 years experience spanning industry, academia and the public sector. She holds a Bachelor of Engineering and doctoral degrees from Trinity College Dublin, and is a graduate of the UCD TCD QUB Innovation Academy in Innovation and Entrepreneurship. So Lucy, I'll now invite you to unmute your mic, switch on your video and take it from here. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, Gemma, and good morning, everyone. And thank you, CIWEM, for inviting me to speak today. So my role today, well, firstly, my name is Lucy Corcoran, and I work in SEAI in a research and technology department, where my role focuses on delivery and management of SEAI's National Energy Research Development and Demonstration Funding Programme, which I'll talk about in more detail later. And then my role today in this presentation is to really tell you about SEAI's research and innovation supports and the role that they play in supporting Ireland's climate action plan. And by the end of this talk, my aim is that you will all have a better understanding of the framework for energy research funding in Ireland and some key insights on potential future opportunities for you all in your respective organisations to develop your research ideas. So to begin with a quick introduction, I'm sure many of you will have heard of SEAI, but just to start with, who is SEAI? Well, we're Ireland's National Sustainable Energy Authority, and our vision is that Ireland's energy will be sustainable, secure, affordable and clean. And to do that, we work with government, homeowners, businesses and communities through expertise, funding, educational programmes, policy advice, and through our research supports, which I'll talk about later. And we've heard how we work with the public sector and Irish Water in the previous presentation from Charlie Coakley. So to achieve this vision, Ireland must use less, become more energy efficient, use clean, develop and enhance our use of renewable energy, and innovate, which I'm really going to focus on today in my presentation. So the need for research and innovation to support Ireland's energy future. This slide provides an overview of the types of energy research and innovation activities that SEAI are involved in. So our mandate here is to lead and coordinate energy research funding in Ireland. And the primary way that we do this is through running our annual call for research projects under SEAI's National Energy Research Development and Demonstration Programme. And this supports innovative energy RD&D projects across a range of different organisations. And I'll talk more about that later. We also feed into energy research priorities at international level through our role as the delegate for energy under Horizon 2020, the European framework for research funding, and the incoming Horizon Europe framework, which kicks off this year for the next 7 years. We're also Ireland's representative to the European Commission Set Plan Steering Group, the Strategic Energy Technology Plan, which aims to align and coordinate energy research priorities and technology development priorities at European level. And lastly, I'll mention here the International Energy Agency. We coordinate Irish participation in collaborative initiatives run through the IEA, the International Energy Agency, and we run regular calls to appoint experts to take part in these collaborative programs on specific energy technology areas. So keep an eye out if anyone's interested in taking part in these collaborations. And now quickly or briefly a summary of the National Energy RD&D funding programme. So this is open at the moment for application. So it's a great opportunity for anyone or any organisation with an idea for a project and innovative energy related projects that will help to contribute to Ireland's transition to a clean and secure energy future. The call is open now. It's open until the 29th of March. So do check out our website for further details on how to apply to the call. And I'll give you some insight into the types of topic areas that are prioritised this year as well in my later slides. So funding through this is available to public and private sector organisations, either applying individually or as part of a consortium, and for projects of up to a maximum of 4 years in duration and up to a maximum budget of €1 million. And the funding rate will depend upon the research activity involved, the type of organisation, and the level of collaboration or dissemination involved in your project. So check out the website for more information on those. And this year's call as well, we have 2 co-funding partnerships with the Department of Transport and Geological Survey Ireland. So this allows us to prioritise research areas in cross-disciplinary areas, so with an energy and transport focus, for example. And in terms of the programme objectives, the programme aims to accelerate the development and deployment of energy products, processes and systems to support solutions that enable barriers to the market to be overcome and to help to grow Ireland's capacity to develop and apply international class research, development and demonstration, and also to provide guidance and support to policy. So today we're focusing on the Climate Action Plan. So this research programme supports innovative and targeted actions that help to deliver national and international policy, including Ireland's Climate Action Plan, the programme for government, and at the international level, looking to Ireland's National Energy and Climate Plan and the EU 2030 Framework for Climate and Energy. If you're interested in applying, the main application documents required are an application form, which is a Word document, and a budget template, an Excel spreadsheet document. And then there's some supporting documents as well in terms of the data management plan and declarations. I won't go into details here, but there is lots of information on our website in the call document in particular and the budget policy document. So in terms of the topic strand, each year we run a cross-government and agency stakeholder consultation process to define particular areas of priority to run in the call. And this year we've got 25 different topics in the topic strand, and 3 of these, as I mentioned, are co-funded projects with the Department of Transport and Geological Survey Ireland. There is also an open strand to apply to, so if the topic strand, maybe there's an idea that's within the energy space but not in the topic strand, you can also apply to the open strand. So to give a flavour of some of the research priorities in this year's call, and we've heard different speakers touch on these areas previously in their presentations today. So in the area of renewable energy, so in wind energy and offshore energy, there's projects looking at topics calling for research, looking at options to mitigate curtailment and constraint of renewable electricity. There's also topics looking at the technical potential for green hydrogen production from Irish onshore and offshore wind in terms of buildings. And we've heard talk on this earlier on embodied energy and the key role that there's a specific topic there looking at life cycle analysis and embodied energy in buildings and the use of sustainable building materials. And then in terms of behavioural, there's a topic co-funded with the Department of Transport aiming to pilot a field trial that would help to encourage EV uptake or to encourage modal shift from the private car to sustainable transport methods. So these are just some of the types of topics areas that are prioritised in this year's research call. And if you look at the call document, there'll be about a 1 page outlining the key background for each of these topics and the kind of types of objectives or outputs that would be expected. So have a look at the call topic areas yourselves for more information on each of these topics here, spanning across offshore, ocean, wind energy, heat, smart grids, buildings, behavioural and transport. For an example of previous research projects supported through the programme, there is a National Energy Research Database that you can search through on SEAI's website. This aims to act as a central hub for energy research in Ireland. So you can search here for projects supported by SEAI or other public sector research funding bodies in the past, and you can read about the types of projects that have been funded, and it's a useful tool to help search for partners potentially if you're thinking of building a project consortium to apply to the programme. So do have a look at the National Energy Research Database. Now, just to give you a flavour of some of the projects that have been supported through the programme in the past, this slide just outlines 3 projects that have been supported by SEAI through the research programme. The first one was a collaboration here between SSE Electricity and UCD, their Centre for Applied Data Analytics, where the consortium developed using artificial intelligence and data analytics tools, a model for forecasting energy generation. And this has been rolled out at wind farms across Ireland. The second project here is by a company called MVP Energy, who've developed an innovative wastewater treatment solution that is a low temperature anaerobic digestion technology, so producing energy and also reducing the energy requirements of the wastewater treatment process, which we've heard earlier is energy intensive. So this particular technology was developed and is suitable for low strength wastewater, so for the food, for example, in food and drinks industry. And the MVP Energy were supported a number of years ago through the program in the early stages of their technology development. And finally, the last project here was a consortium between Mullen Grid Consulting, DCU, Abo Wind and Quilcha, and it was a modelling project looking at the impact of curtailment mitigation options on high renewable electricity systems, so with a focus on meeting Ireland's 2030 and 2040 targets. And this was completed a year or so ago now, and you can find out more about the project outputs themselves online. But these, I suppose, projects here give an idea of the types of projects that are possible, the types of collaborations that are possible, and hopefully some inspiration for anyone with ideas to try to apply to the programme for funding. I'm coming to the end of my presentation now. So this is a summary slide, really just to remind you of the call that's open at the moment. It's open to public and private sector organisations, so companies, research organisations, public and semi-state bodies, to apply together or individually or together as a consortium. And there's funding ranging from small scale projects of 1 year duration up to 4 years duration, larger scale projects, and up to maximum budget there of €1 million. And again, there's a topic strand with 25 specific topic areas included and an open strand. And now, just to come to the close of my presentation, a reminder of the other types of opportunities in energy research and funding. So there is the national call, as I've talked about here, which supports organisations based in Ireland, but there is also Horizon Europe, which is the European framework where Irish organisations can partner with organisations across Europe and apply for funding there. And under Horizon Europe, which is the next 7-year framework, there's a 95 billion budget, and this is the largest budget that the Horizon funding programme has had. And under the EU Green Deal, at least 35% of that has been ring-fenced to support climate relevant research relevant to implementing implementing the European Green Deal. So there's huge opportunities there at the European level for funding and support. And there's a launch event for Ireland being held by Enterprise Ireland online on the 25th of March. So if you search that online, you can register, and here you can find out a bit more about the plans for Horizon Europe and the options and some practical advice for researchers who are thinking of applying. And there's also another European fund, the Innovation Fund, and you can find out more details. The Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications are the national contact point there, and you can find out more information on that. It supports innovative energy and low carbon tech demonstrations. So I'm really coming to the end now, but just one last slide. If anyone is interested in podcasts, I know there's lots of podcasts out there at the moment, but SEAI has released season 2 of our podcast called 180 Degrees, and you can listen to that online. And there is an episode in season 2 that focuses on the role of energy research in supporting Ireland's climate transition. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation today, and I'm happy to take any questions, or if you would like to follow up with me, again, my contact details are here. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lucy. Really struck me as you were going through there that the great insight into the available funding for and the different focus areas. It really struck me that you mentioned the cross-sectoral areas in some cases, that the easy stuff to a degree has been done, as I mentioned earlier. What we're facing now are the complex challenges, and it's great to see that there's funding behind trying to sort out or trying to imagine ways through some of those complex problems.
Yeah, thanks. And I think collaboration is key as well. So yeah, the more
Absolutely.
people working together, the better.
Thank you for that. Just a reminder to our audience watching, don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A section on Zoom. And also, Barbara has been posting in the chat all of references and links to all of the action plans, etc., that have been referenced by our speakers through the morning. Our final speaker for this session is Dennis Devan. Dennis has been Wind Energy Ireland's policy and data analyst since 2018. As head of WEI's planning committee, Dennis specialises in solving planning and environmental issues that hinder the development of renewable energy projects. This work covers areas such as grid connections, planning decision timelines, and among others, industry responses to draft county development plans, etc. Dennis has previously lived in Denmark, where he studied for an MSc in Environmental Sciences at Copenhagen University and worked for a climate and energy transition business periodical, Foresight. So Dennis, I'd invite you now to unmute your mic and switch on your video and share your screen.
Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you.
Just share my screen.
All good.
Now, hopefully you can see all of that.
Yep.
Perfect, great. So thank you for the kind introduction, and I would just like to thank CIWEM for the opportunity to speak today. For the next 10 minutes, I'm going to try my best to cover off basically the climate action plan and how the wind industry is dealing with energy and planning problems that we are going to come across in our goal to reach our 2030 targets. So I'm going to basically use two pieces of research that we've done recently, and I'm going to concentrate on both onshore and offshore. So hopefully in the given time, I'll be able to get through it all. So first of all, who are we? Wind Energy Ireland is basically the representative body for the Irish wind industry in Ireland. And we've recently rebranded. You may know us from the Irish Wind Energy Association, which is our former name. But we represent all onshore and offshore wind energy companies in Ireland. And we basically, as you can see here in this slide, you have a lot of different types of areas that we work with, whether it's supply chain, planning consultancies, wind farm developers themselves. So there's a wide range of membership within our group. Now, what do we actually do? Well, we promote wind energy and its emissions reductions, energy security benefits, and cost savings for consumers and investment in communities. So this is most of our work, and most of the work I do is along the lines of key policy positions that we create, and we advocate those to the government and important stakeholders in Ireland. Down below here, you can see some of our examples of some of our previous work, which you can all find on our website. Now, in order to look at how we're doing and where we need to go, we kind of need to just take stock of how we are doing in 2020 or post or 2021. Ireland is actually number one. It's not very well known, but we're number one for onshore wind in Europe, and that's based on the percentage of electricity demand covered by wind in 2020. So you can see we are 38%. And the only country that's beating us is Denmark, and that's because they've already made great steps into building their offshore wind capacity. So going forward, what does actually that 38% kind of translate to in reality? Well, in reality, it's about an investment into infrastructure of about 6 to 7 billion. It's the creation of about 4,500 jobs across our membership. It's attracting FDA foreign direct investment, and it's investing in communities where we have per turbine now. Most community supports about 60,000 per turbine, and there's other elements like the rates that are charged by local authorities. So 40 million a year goes to that alone. So as you can see, there's many benefits to what we currently already have in our wind industry. So now pivoting to what we've been discussing today and our attempts to reach our climate action plan targets. IWEA, or previously IWEA, was working on these reports, but Wind Energy Ireland, basically, we have had 4 reports which look at how we're going to get to that 70 by 30 target, and we called it our implementation plans. And within those today, I'm only going to really look at the 2 reports on the right-hand side. So I'm just going to keep zipping along. So first off, we're going to look at onshore wind and the planning challenges that are in place in reaching our targets. So as you can see here, this is basically the breakdown of our analysis in this report. But just to go through it really briefly, our research first looked at the baseline for what onshore development is occurring right now without any policy improvements. That's just the status quo as it is today. And you can see where those bars are there and where we'll be going as we go towards the end of the decade. Now, we also then analyzed basically 9 improvements that we could have across policy improvements across the board. And we calculated those and put them in, and you can see where we could be if we have planning improvements, which this report dictates. And at the top, you see there's the actual target we want to reach, which pretty much is roughly a doubling of our current onshore capacity. So there is a lot of work to do. Now, today, I obviously don't have enough time to go in depth, but this red box here looks at the 3 policy improvements which are most related to planning. And I'll just look into the first one to give you an example of some of the improvements and challenges we face. So the first one is our pre-planning success rate. We want to increase this. And one way we see of increasing this is by looking at landscape classification for wind energy. Now, this quite complicated looking map is actually an example of what developers and planners have to deal with when you have transboundaries. We have 4 counties here. So we have Meath, Kildare, Wicklow and Offaly. But for example, if you look down here at Wicklow and Kildare on the right-hand side, you can see the varying difference in how planners have classified land in the different counties. Now, obviously, you can see how this can cause confusion, complicated processes and applications, and also a reduction in the potential land that we can use for developing of wind. So this is what currently planners are dealing with. So how do we fix this? Well, our solution for this is that we move towards a regional approach for spatial planning of wind. So that's going from our local approach, which is having 31 individual assessments of wind energy strategies and assessments of land characteristics. So moving from 31 down to just having 3 broader, more inclusive looks at how landscape can be used and how we can roll out wind energy. So that's just number 1 of our policy pieces for consenting for onshore wind. So the other 2, I'm not going to go into them right now because we obviously don't have enough time, but it's SID pre-application stages. We have a new idea just to increase the efficiency of that. And we are looking at how we could improve upon onboard planolas decision timelines, which in the past have been quite a problem for the industry. So if we get these policy solutions in place for onshore wind, I think we can move from what we currently had in the past, which was between 6 to 11 years it took for a wind farm to be developed. We could move that actually down to 4 to 8 years if we just, reduce this planning or permitting time period. So a faster planning process is really what's needed in order for us to double our capacity for onshore wind. Moving along now to offshore, which is all the buzz and is a hugely growing industry and a huge opportunity for Ireland from to 2030 and obviously out to 2050 and beyond. So this is the most recent pipeline survey that we have from back when we were branded as Wind Energy Ireland. But in this current state, you can see that there's 23 active projects in the pipeline, and that represents 16 gigawatts of capacity. So, our climate action plan aims to have 5 gigawatts by the end of 2030. And we currently have we have 25 megawatts from a test Arklow offshore wind farm. But that 16 obviously will be eroded by project attrition. But the next 12 months is going to be incredibly important for where we go and how we will do in our 2030 targets. So just to give you some context, if we don't have planning in place for these wind farms in the early adopter wind farms, we're going to, if they're not in place by 2025, we're not going to be built by 2030. So finishing off our offshore consenting policy is incredibly important in the next year and two. So our analysis in the report, I'm not going to go too much into detail, but you can see here we have broken it into phase 1 projects, which are further along or already in the planning system. And then we have the phase 2 projects, which are projects that are next up in line and have the chance to meet the 2030 targets. So in our analysis, and we looked at it again now this quarter, and it seems that we are not on track to reach our 5 gigawatt offshore wind target. And this is predominantly based on a number of things. I will obviously only be looking at the consenting issues, but there's a few policy improvements and kind of policy goals we have to reach in the next couple of years. And I'll be looking at basically not in as much detail, but I'll be looking at some of them. So when we look at our policy improvements for onshore consenting or planning, we have 4 major asks. And the first one is that the government would issue foreshore licenses and create exclusivity for seabeds in 2030. So the projects would need to be in place by Q4 of 2021. Now, the next area that we need to have looked at is the complete national marine planning framework. That's just for the policy piece that needs to be, it's nearly there, but it needs to be finalized and finished up. We also have the same bit of work to do for the enacting of the Marine Planning and Development Management Bill, which is very much nearly there as well, but we still need to keep pushing. And finally, we need onboard Planola to have sufficient resources in order to deal with what you can see here on the right-hand side, which is a huge number of onshore and offshore developments going down the line. If you can see here, 2023 is looking like a big year for onboard Planola, who will be directly dealing with all the onshore and, offshore developments. Now, if we get these 4 policy improvements in place, we estimate that we can have an additional 890 megawatts by 2030. Compared to our baseline scenario we saw earlier. Now, what does that translate to? Well, looking at the same graphs, we can see that now we will have saved in the phase 1 timelines for offshore wind farms, we will have saved 3 years. And in the phase 2, we will have saved 5.5 years. So you can see where the timelines estimates have improved and how we definitely need this in order to reach any way to reach that 5 gigawatt goal. So just to finish up, I know I'm running low on time, but basically, if we reach towards, I only talked about the planning solutions, but these reports have looked at both grid, route to market, and grid capacity issues. So, this is specifically from our offshore report, and basically you can see that the annual and cumulative levels can increase for our onshore connections, and we can reach that 5 gigawatts. But we need to have every single policy piece within this report. That needs to be done by the government. So in summation, basically we have a lot done, but we have a lot more to do. So yeah, that's my presentation.
Thanks, Dennis. Sounds, yeah, as you say, it sounds like you have a busy 2021 ahead of you.
Yes, indeed.
And a hell of a challenge. The offshore, I think, is key to achieving the challenges and the objectives set out in the climate action plan. So getting that in place is I would imagine very important. And for timing wise, it sounds like you've a lot ahead of you this year, particularly.
Yeah, it's quite a busy year. When you think COVID would have slowed things down, it's actually sped things up in policy circles anyway. So
it's fun. I think we've seen that. We've seen that, I think, across a lot of sectors. Active travel would be another, with the cycle lanes, etc. But it's interesting to see where it has held us up in some ways and sped things up in others.
Yeah.
At this stage, and you're right, I think timing wise, thank you to our audience, everybody who is stuck with us at this stage. I think we've had some very, very interesting presentations, but I'd like to invite Lucy and Charlie back. We have a couple of interesting questions here. Charlie, initially there's one here for you. Any comment on managing asset resilience to flooding and other climate challenges?
Absolutely, yeah. Apologies with time today. I mean, as I set out, our approach is one of both mitigation and adaptation, but the focus today really was on the mitigation side, because time wouldn't allow me to even look at the adaptation side. But just a few points briefly on it. We did work very closely with the department and other stakeholders and developed the first ever climate water sector adaptation plan for Ireland. And we also completed some innovative and groundbreaking work with Icarus Maynooth, in terms of which looks at looking at a bottom-up approach from the catchments that accounts for both catchment sensitivity, but also to climate change, but also uncertainty in future climate change projections. And that's all feeding into our National Water Resources Plan, which is currently out for consultation, which does look at a changing climate and the national water resource impact of climate change and providing a sustainable water resources within environmental constraints. And that's a 25-year strategy. That's currently on, anyone can go into our website there and can comment on the framework approach we're taking. And just to say, and that's from the catchment side, but also from the flooding side, the work we've done with Icarus, and I know OPW have done similar work on the flooding side, is all feeding into a climate change vulnerability and management standard that we're currently developing within the business, which is falling out of it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And as you say, that is open for consultation. The catchment side on your website.
The National Water Resources Plan is open for. But people can also learn about the work we did with Icarus Maynooth through. If you go into our website, you'll see there's an innovation section there. And if you go in there, you'll see the work done we did there, and you can learn more about that project, because it is quite groundbreaking in terms of, obviously, we have catchments right across the island of Ireland, and how that interacts, or how climate change and more importantly, the models impact those climates. So we're developing out a standard for the designers, so in future we can take a risk-based control in terms of our catchments. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Another question from Bridget Priestley here. One of the things that John had raised is infrastructure availability. What work is being done to push that piece on the regional level? I'm wondering, that's probably directed maybe to Dennis and to Charlie independently. Maybe Dennis, you want to take that first? You're on mute, Dennis.
Sorry, could you just I might have just missed that there.
Sorry, and it's harping back. It's coming back to some of the you mentioned about grid capacity, etc. The question is, one of the things that John had raised is infrastructure availability. What work is being done to push that piece on the regional level? I suppose it comes back to maybe the grid capacity in terms of connection points, etc. for wind farms.
Yeah. Well, EirGrid is working at strengthening their grid capacity all throughout, and they have a number of projects that are running. But yeah, trying to get the community to go along with big infrastructural or large power lines running through their countryside, etc. You know, it's a difficulty, and we do really need to have people to come along with, as John said in his presentation. But on a regional level, I would usually think that it'd be the grid. It would be the grid infrastructure is generally led by ESPN and EirGrid. So they're doing a huge amount of work in that area. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Charlie, something similar to you? Is there?
I mean, our approach is actually to feed our asset base rather than feeding into the grid at the moment.
Okay.
We may look at, and in the future, we may look at coming onto the grid, but currently we want to supply our own asset base with electricity. And that may be either direct supply behind the meter or potentially done future through a PPA arrangement.
Okay, okay, thank you. In terms of Lucy, I'm conscious that one of the things I was going to ask you was in terms of the challenges that you see to achieving achieving the objectives of the Climate Action Plan. But in all likelihood, the topics are of your research fund detail those. Am I right, or where do you see that the biggest challenges lying?
I think it's a great question. I think, well, of course, from the research perspective, challenges are opportunities to come up with new solutions. But again, as has been mentioned by a number of the speakers today, I suppose the collective action is the big challenge. So the need for everyone to get involved, and organizations, industry, community level, and the importance to bring people along on that journey. So I suppose on the positives, well, I don't know if we can talk about positives, but in the last year, we've seen the huge potential for collective action in the face of adversity. And there's a lot of discussion, I suppose, in terms of the economic recovery being a green recovery, and the opportunity now to build green and to develop new solutions and approaches, and to come at it from that sustainable perspective. So I think there are huge opportunities now, and I mentioned already at the funding level, there will be opportunities at European level for financing of projects through this Horizon Europe framework, in the ring fenced for the projects that will help to deliver the Green Deal. So I think there are huge opportunities there to address these challenges.
And one, if I'm hearing right, one one of the main drivers, or one of the main solutions we can see, will be collaboration across organisations, and winning the hearts and minds of public and policymakers. Yeah, is that fair to say?
I think so. Yeah, collaboration will be really, really key to enable this transformation, this whole complete shift in how we do things to reach these ambitious targets. Yeah.
I found in our own organisation, we became carbon neutral in 2020, a target that was pulled forward by 2 years, which caused quite a few gasps in the room when that was suggested and pushed forward. One of the things we found was that transparency, and by publishing internally our own carbon footprints across all of the offices, it was amazing how the little bit of competition and the league tables of whose carbon footprint was better than whose started to push things forward. And we were surprised by some of the really innovative ideas that came forward to try and pull the carbon footprint down. So absolutely agree that collaboration and reaching out across organizations can be a hugely powerful thing in achieving that. I think we've addressed the questions here. Invite any of the speakers. Is there anything else any other comments you'd like to make before we round up? Because I'm conscious that we have run a little bit over time.
I just see there's a question there on water charges. And
apology, Charlie, I must have missed it. So yeah, yes, there is.
No, that's quite all right. As I'm just coming and saying, that our business customers do pay for water, and whether the decision on water charges obviously is not with Irish Water. That's a government decision to make on whether Irish Water pays for it. In saying that, it is expensive. I pay for my own water. I have my own well and my own wastewater treatment system because I live in the country. So I do understand how costly it is. But yeah, definitely it would be good. I think water is not cheap. You can quite clearly see from my presentation what goes in terms of energy, and that's just on the energy side of the house. So it's not cheap, but that's not a decision that Irish Water can take.
Thank you for that, and apologies for missing out on it earlier.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Okay, Thank you very much to all of the speakers and to our audience, and apologies again that we've run a little bit over, but it was a really interesting discussion and a really interesting presentations. I'd like to thank all of the speakers, obviously, for a lively presentation of key issues around climate change and faced by quite disparate organisations, though each with a strong role to play in helping Ireland reach our objectives set out in the government's 2019 Climate Action Plan. On behalf of the Republic of Ireland branch committee, I'd like to thank Barbara Woods and her team at CIWEM in London for the organisational support today in the webinar. In regard to the next webinar planned by the Republic of Ireland branch committee, this is on April 27th, 2021 from 6 to 7 p.m. Speaker is Andy Dunn, who is a chief engineer at Thames Water. Andy will speak about the challenge of meeting a net zero target on operational emissions by 2030, since this commitment is contained in Water UK's net zero 2030 route map. The route map sets out industry vision for how water companies, which together produce almost a third of UK industrial and waste process emissions, will play their part in tackling climate change by reaching net zero 2 decades ahead of the UK's government's legally binding target of 2050. Finally, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for joining us today, for staying with us in running over a little bit over time, and for contributing some very insightful questions, and to wish you all a lovely rest of your day. Goodbye, and thank you very much.